Catherine Monroe stood at the entrance of Atlanta International Airport's private terminal, checking her phone one last time before heading inside. The morning sun was bright, and a gentle breeze played with her curly black hair. At 38 years old, she had built Monroe Aviation from the ground up, turning it into one of the Southeast's most successful private jet companies. Today was like any other busy Thursday for her. She was dressed comfortably but professionally, dark blue jeans, a crisp white blouse, and her favorite black flats. Her small carry-on bag contained everything she needed for the important board meeting in Chicago. Catherine wasn't the type to wear fancy suits or designer clothes just to impress others. She believed in being practical and authentic. As she walked through the parking lot, Catherine noticed how quiet it was compared to the main terminal. This private section of the airport was exclusive, serving wealthy business people and celebrities who could afford private jets. The familiar smell of jet fuel filled the air, mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass from the nearby lawn. Several airport workers and pilots nodded at her as security guard James Walsh stood at his post, his face stern and his posture rigid. It was only his second week working at the private terminal, having transferred from a smaller regional airport. He took pride in his job, perhaps too much pride, and had very fixed ideas about who belonged in a private jet terminal. As Catherine approached the security checkpoint, Walsh's expression hardened. Without even looking at the ID card she was holding out, he stepped directly in front of her, blocking her path. His hand raised in a stopping motion, and his voice came out sharp and loud. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area," Walsh announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This terminal is for private jet passengers and authorized personnel only. The main terminal is that way." He pointed towards the exit, his tone dripping with condescension. Catherine remained calm, though her heart began beating faster. She'd faced similar situations before, but it never got easier. "Sir, I have my identification right here," she said, trying again to show him her credentials. "I'm the owner of Monroe Aviation, and my jet is." Walsh cut her off before she could finish. "Listen, ma'am," he said, emphasizing the word ma'am in a way that made it sound like an insult. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. Please don't make this difficult." Around them, other passengers and airport staff began to notice the confrontation. Some walked past quickly, avoiding eye contact, while others slowed down to watch. A group of white executives walked through the checkpoint, and Walsh barely glanced at their IDs before waving them through with a friendly "Have a good flight, gentlemen." Catherine took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "Sir, if you would just look at my identification." "Ma'am, I'm going to have to call for backup if you don't leave immediately." Walsh interrupted again, reaching for his radio. "We take security very seriously here." The situation was getting worse by the minute. Catherine noticed people whispering and pointing. Some had their phones out, possibly recording the incident. She felt her cheeks growing warm, not from embarrassment but from controlled anger at the unfairness of it all. Just then, a young ground crew member named Tommy, who had worked with Catherine many times before, walked past. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening. He started to say something, but Walsh shot him a stern look that made the young man hesitate. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice asked. Maria Rodriguez, the veteran ground crew supervisor, approached the checkpoint. She had worked at the terminal for over a decade and knew Catherine well. Walsh straightened up even more. "Just removing someone who doesn't belong here," he said confidently. "No need for concern." Maria's eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to speak, but Catherine gave her a subtle shake of the head. Years of experience had taught Catherine that letting situations like this play out could lead to important changes. More security guards were approaching now, responding to Walsh's earlier radio call. The terminal lobby had grown unusually quiet, with everyone watching the scene unfold. Through the windows, Catherine could see her pilot and co-pilot walking towards the terminal, along with her executive team. Walsh was still standing there, his face red with authority and determination. He had no idea that the woman he was trying to remove owned not just one, but several of the private jets parked outside, including the largest one bearing the Monroe Aviation logo. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other security guards arrived, looking confused as they recognized Catherine. Walsh, however, remained oblivious to the shifting atmosphere around him. He was about to learn a very important lesson about making assumptions. Through it all, Catherine maintained her composure. She'd worked too hard and come too far to let one prejudiced security guard rattle her. But she also knew that this moment could be turned into something meaningful, a teaching opportunity that could help prevent similar incidents in the future. The morning sun continued to stream through the terminal windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight on a stage. In just a few moments, everything would change, and James Walsh would learn exactly who Catherine Monroe was. But for now, they remained locked in this tense standoff, with the whole terminal watching to see what would happen next. The situation at the private terminal was reaching a boiling point. More and more people gathered around, creating a half circle around Catherine and Guard Walsh. The morning's peaceful atmosphere had completely disappeared, replaced by thick tension that filled the air. Catherine's executive team was now walking through the terminal doors. Among them was Michael Chen, her chief operating officer, and Sarah Thompson, the company's lead attorney. Their expressions changed from casual conversation to shock as they saw their CEO being confronted by security. Walsh, still unaware of his massive mistake, continued his aggressive stance. "Ma'am, I've called for backup, and they're here now," he said, gesturing to the other security guards who had arrived. "This is your last chance to leave quietly, or we'll have to escort you out." The other security guards shifted uncomfortably. Two of them, veterans at the terminal, exchanged worried glances. They recognized Catherine immediately, but weren't sure how to handle the situation without undermining their colleague's authority. "James," one of them whispered, trying to get Walsh's attention, "I think you should." "I know how to do my job, Dave," Walsh snapped, cutting off his colleague. His face was now red with anger and frustration. This woman is trying to access a restricted area without proper authorization. Catherine's COO, Michael Chen, stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said firmly, "but do you realize who you're speaking to?" Walsh turned to Michael, his expression changing slightly. "Sir, please stay back. We're handling a security situation here." Sarah Thompson, the attorney, pulled out her phone and started recording. "Please continue," she said calmly. "This will make for an interesting case study in our next security discrimination workshop." The terminal had gone completely silent. Even the usual announcements over the speakers seemed to have paused. Through the windows, Catherine could see her pilot and co-pilot standing outside, watching the scene with concerned expressions. Maria Rodriguez, the ground crew supervisor, had finally had enough. She stepped forward, her name badge clearly visible on her uniform. "Mr. Walsh," she said loudly, "the woman you're preventing from entering is—" Catherine raised her hand, silencing Maria. Everyone watched as she calmly opened her designer laptop bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a magazine, Aviation Weekly's latest issue. On the cover was a full-page photo of Catherine standing in front of her fleet of private jets. The headline read, "Catherine Monroe, Revolutionizing Private Aviation in the Southeast." She held the magazine up to Walsh's eye level. His expression froze as he looked at the cover, then back at Catherine, then at the cover again. The color began draining from his face as realization slowly dawned on him. "My name is Catherine Monroe," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I own Monroe Aviation. That jet out there with my company's name on it. That's mine. In fact, 6 of the 12 jets currently parked on this tarmac belong to my company." Walsh's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The other security guards had taken several steps back, distancing themselves from the situation. Some of the passengers who had been allowed through earlier were now watching from the other side of the checkpoint, their faces showing a mix of shock and embarrassment. "I've been flying out of this terminal for 7 years," Catherine continued. "I employ over 100 people, including several security staff members at this very terminal. And yet, you decided, without even looking at my ID, that I didn't belong here." The silence that followed was deafening. Walsh's radio crackled, breaking the tension momentarily. Through the terminal windows, more airport officials could be seen hurrying towards the building. The morning sun had risen higher, and its bright light seemed to spotlight the scene like a stage drama reaching its climax. Michael Chen stepped closer to Catherine, handing her another folder, the documents for their Chicago meeting. Sarah Thompson was still recording, her phone capturing every moment of this incident that would soon become a turning point in airport security protocols. Catherine looked at her watch. Despite this unpleasant delay, she still had time to make her meeting in Chicago. But first, she had some important business to handle right here. This incident wouldn't be swept under the rug or forgotten. It was time to turn this moment of discrimination into an opportunity for real change. The story was far from over, and Guard Walsh was about to learn that his actions would have consequences far beyond this morning's confrontation. The atmosphere in the private terminal grew more intense as Robert Maxwell, the airport security director, rushed through the doors. A tall man in his 50s with graying hair, he had received multiple urgent calls about the situation unfolding at the checkpoint. Maxwell's face showed immediate concern when he saw Catherine Monroe standing there. They had known each other for years and had even worked together on improving terminal security protocols. His eyes darted from Catherine to Walsh, quickly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Monroe," Maxwell said, walking briskly toward her. "I just got word of what's happening here. I can't begin to express how." Catherine raised her hand politely, interrupting his apology. "Robert, before you continue, I think everyone here needs to understand exactly what just happened." Her voice was calm but carried authority that made everyone listen carefully. Guard Walsh stood frozen in his spot, his face now pale and sweaty. The magazine cover with Catherine's photo was still in his hands, shaking slightly. Other passengers had stopped their activities to watch the scene, many of them regular clients of Monroe Aviation who recognized Catherine. Sarah Thompson, Catherine's attorney, stepped forward with her phone still recording. "Mr. Maxwell, in the past 15 minutes, your security guard has refused to check Ms. Monroe's identification, made assumptions based on her appearance, threatened to forcibly remove her from the premises, and ignored multiple attempts by other staff to correct his mistake." The terminal remained unusually quiet. Even the usual sounds of jets taking off outside seemed muted. Through the large windows, more airport officials could be seen gathering, along with local news reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the incident. Maria Rodriguez, the ground crew supervisor, spoke up. "I tried to tell him who Ms. Monroe was," she said, her voice firm. "But he wouldn't listen to any of us." Maxwell turned to Walsh, his expression stern. "James, is this true?" Walsh struggled to find words. "Sir, I was just following security protocols. I didn't think. She didn't look like." "Didn't look like what?" Catherine asked quietly, but her question echoed through the terminal. "Like someone who could own private jets, like someone who belongs here." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Several other black executives who regularly used the terminal had gathered nearby, their faces showing understanding of what Catherine had experienced. They had faced similar prejudices in their own careers. Michael Chen, Catherine's COO, checked his watch. "Miss Monroe, we should start boarding soon if we want to make the Chicago meeting on time." Catherine nodded but didn't move toward the jet yet. Instead, she turned to address everyone in the terminal. "What happened here today is not unique," she began. "It happens every day in airports, offices, and businesses across the country. People make assumptions based on appearance, and those assumptions create barriers." She paused, looking directly at Walsh, but this is also an opportunity to learn, to change, and to do better. Robert Maxwell stepped forward again. "Ms. Monroe, I assure you this will be thoroughly investigated. Mr. Walsh's actions do not reflect our terminal's values or policies." The crowd had grown larger. Among them were several of Catherine's employees who worked at the terminal, all watching their CEO handle this difficult situation with grace and wisdom. Some were taking notes, knowing that this incident would become a significant moment in their company's history. Through the windows, Catherine's Gulfstream G650 sat waiting on the tarmac, its engines ready for the flight to Chicago. The morning sun reflected off its polished surface, highlighting the Monroe Aviation logo, a symbol of success that Catherine had built despite facing prejudices like this throughout her career. "Robert," Catherine said, turning to the security director, "I don't want Mr. Walsh fired." This statement caused surprised murmurs among the onlookers. Walsh himself looked up in shock. Instead, she continued, "I want something more meaningful to come from this incident. But right now, I have a board meeting to attend in Chicago. When I return, we'll discuss how we can turn this unfortunate situation into a positive change for everyone." The tension in the terminal began to shift. What had started as a discriminatory confrontation was transforming into something else, a catalyst for change. But as Catherine gathered her things to finally head toward her jet, everyone knew that this story was far from over. 3 hours later, Catherine sat in her private jet flying back from Chicago. The board meeting had been successful. They had approved her West Coast expansion plans, but her mind kept returning to the morning's events at the Atlanta terminal. She looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about how to handle what came next. Her phone buzzed with notifications. The incident had gone viral. Someone had recorded everything on their phone, and now the video was spreading across social media. News channels were trying to reach her for comments, and hashtag Monroe Aviation was trending on Twitter. Michael Chen, sitting across from her in the jet, looked up from his tablet. "Catherine, you need to see this," he said, passing her the device. The video of the incident had already received millions of views. Comments were pouring in from people sharing similar experiences of discrimination they had faced. Sarah Thompson, reviewing the situation from a legal standpoint, spoke up. The airport's legal team has sent over their initial response. They're prepared to terminate Walsh immediately and issue a public apology. Catherine shook her head. "That's exactly what we don't need. Firing one person won't solve the bigger problem." She stood up and walked to the jet's window, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and purple hues. Back at the Atlanta terminal, James Walsh sat in the security office, his head in his hands. His supervisor had placed him on immediate administrative leave. The shame of his actions weighed heavily on him as he watched the video of himself that was now circulating online. Robert Maxwell, the airport security director, entered the office. "James, Ms. Monroe's jet will land in an hour. She's requested a meeting with all of us." His tone was serious but not angry. Walsh looked up, surprised. She wants to meet with me? After what I did?" Meanwhile, Maria Rodriguez was gathering the terminal's security team for an emergency meeting. The day shift was ending, but nobody was leaving. They all knew something important was about to happen. As Catherine's jet approached Atlanta, she finalized her plans. Sarah had helped her draft a proposal that would change how security training was conducted not just at this terminal, but potentially at private airports across the country. The jet landed smoothly at sunset. When Catherine stepped out, she found the terminal's atmosphere completely different from the morning. Robert Maxwell was waiting with his senior staff. James Walsh stood slightly behind them, looking nervous and ashamed. Catherine walked directly to the conference room where everyone was gathering. The room was packed. Security staff, ground crew, terminal management, and even some regular passengers who had heard about the meeting and stayed to watch. "Good evening, everyone," Catherine began, her voice clear and confident. "This morning, we all witnessed something that happens far too often in our society. But instead of letting this become just another viral video or angry headline, we're going to turn it into real change." She opened her laptop and projected a presentation on the wall. "I've spent the flight back developing a new training program. We're calling it Recognition and Respect, Beyond Security Protocols." The room was silent as Catherine explained her plan. It wasn't just about avoiding discrimination. It was about creating a culture of respect and understanding. The program would include real-world scenarios, personal stories from diverse executives, and practical guidelines for respectful security procedures. James Walsh, who had been staring at the floor, slowly looked up as Catherine described the changes. To his surprise, she was including him in the solution. "Mr. Walsh," she said, turning to him, "your actions this morning were wrong, but your willingness to learn from this mistake can help prevent similar incidents in the future. I'm offering you a choice. You can resign, or you can help us develop and implement this training program." The room held its breath, waiting for Walsh's response. His face showed a mix of emotions: shame, relief, and something else: hope. Maria Rodriguez watched from the back of the room, smiling slightly. She had known Catherine for years and wasn't surprised by her approach. This was why Monroe Aviation had become such a successful company. Its leader knew how to turn challenges into opportunities. As the sunset's final rays filtered through the terminal's windows, it was clear to everyone that this day would be remembered not for the morning's discrimination, but for the evening's transformation. The story wasn't over yet, but it was taking a turn that no one had expected. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at Atlanta's private terminal. Catherine sat in her office, reviewing the changes that had already begun. The morning sun streamed through her office windows, highlighting the newspaper headlines scattered across her desk, all covering the story and its unexpected aftermath. James Walsh had made his decision that evening. In front of everyone in the conference room, he had stood up, his voice shaking but determined. "Ms. Monroe, if you're willing to give me this chance, I want to be part of the solution." Now, Walsh sat in the training room down the hall from Catherine's office, working with a diverse team of aviation professionals. They were developing the new security training program together. His perspective as someone who had made serious mistakes, combined with his 15 years of security experience, was proving valuable. Sarah Thompson entered Catherine's office with the latest updates. "The response has been overwhelming," she said, placing a thick folder on the desk. 12 other private airports have already requested to implement our training program, and the FAA is interested in discussing it for wider adoption. Catherine smiled, remembering how different things could have gone if she had chosen anger over understanding. The incident video had now been viewed over 10 million times, but the follow-up story of transformation was getting even more attention. Down in the terminal, Maria Rodriguez was conducting a training session with the security team. Walsh sat among them, no longer in his guard uniform, but wearing a polo shirt with training developer embroidered on it. His face showed focus and humility as he shared his story with the new security staff. "I thought I was just doing my job," Walsh explained to the group. "But I was letting my prejudices make decisions instead of following proper procedures. I nearly lost my career, but more importantly, I'd almost missed an opportunity to learn and grow." The security staff listened intently. Among them were guards from various backgrounds, young and old, different races and ethnicities. This was part of the new hiring initiative Catherine had implemented to make the security team more diverse. Robert Maxwell, the airport security director, joined the training session. He watched as Walsh and Maria ran through scenarios with the staff, teaching them how to maintain security while treating everyone with respect and dignity. "Remember," Maria said to the group, "every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with respect. Your job is to verify credentials, not make assumptions." In her office, Catherine received a call from a major aviation industry magazine. They wanted to feature Monroe Aviation's new training program in their next issue. But more than that, they wanted to highlight how one incident of discrimination had been transformed into a movement for positive change. The reporter asked Catherine why she'd had chosen this approach instead of pursuing legal action or demanding Walsh's termination. Catherine thought carefully before responding. "Change doesn't happen through punishment alone," she explained. "Real transformation comes when we help people understand their mistakes and give them a chance to be part of the solution." Later that afternoon, Catherine walked through the terminal. The atmosphere had changed noticeably. Security checks were being conducted with both efficiency and respect. She noticed Walsh working with a new guard, showing him how to properly verify credentials while maintaining a professional and respectful demeanor. When Walsh saw Catherine, he straightened up. The shame in his eyes had been replaced by gratitude and determination. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "we're making progress. The new training modules are really connecting with people." Catherine nodded approvingly. She watched as a diverse group of executives passed through security, each receiving the same professional treatment. The changes were visible, but she knew this was just the beginning. Back in her office, Catherine looked at her calendar. In the coming months, she was scheduled to speak at several aviation industry conferences about the training program. Monroe Aviation was becoming known not just for its excellent private jet service, but for leading the way in promoting respect and dignity in aviation security. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows through the terminal windows. Catherine gathered her things, preparing to head home. As she walked through the terminal, she saw her own story being used in a training video, not as an example of discrimination, but as a lesson in how to turn a negative situation into positive change. The security team nodded respectfully as she passed. Among them was Walsh, standing tall and professional, a living example that people could learn, change, and grow when given the chance. 6 months had passed since the incident at Atlanta's private terminal. On a bright Monday morning, Catherine Monroe stood at a podium in the main conference hall of the National Aviation Security Summit in Washington, D.C. The room was packed with airport directors, security chiefs, and aviation industry leaders from across the country. Behind her, a large screen showed the training program's results. The statistics were impressive. Complaints about discriminatory treatment at the Atlanta private terminal had dropped to zero. Employee satisfaction had increased by 65%, and the terminal's security efficiency had actually improved with the new respectful screening procedures. What started as a personal incident has grown into something much bigger, Catherine said to the audience. The Monroe Protocol, as it's now being called, has been adopted by 37 private terminals across the country. In the front row sat James Walsh, now the lead trainer for the program. He looked different from the angry security guard of 6 months ago. His posture was confident but humble, and he wore a neat suit with the Monroe Aviation Training Division logo. After Catherine's speech, Walsh took the stage. His hands trembled slightly as he faced the crowd, but his voice was steady. 6 months ago, I was the problem, he began. Today, I'm part of the solution. This program didn't just save my job, it changed my life. Back in Atlanta, Maria Rodriguez was giving a tour to representatives from international airports. The terminal had become a model for others to follow. Security checks were smooth, professional, and respectful. The security team was now diverse, well-trained, and proud of their work. Watch how our officers verify credentials, Maria had explained to the visitors. Notice how they maintain eye contact, show respect, and follow procedures without making assumptions. This is what we call security with dignity. Robert Maxwell, who had traveled to Washington with Catherine and Walsh, sat in the conference audience feeling proud. His terminal had become famous for all the right reasons. Other airport directors constantly asked him about the program's implementation. After the presentations, Catherine met with FAA officials who wanted to make the training program mandatory for all private aviation facilities. They were impressed by how a potentially devastating incident had been turned into a positive industry-wide change. Your approach to handling that situation was extraordinary, one official told her. Instead of filing lawsuits or demanding terminations, you created a solution that benefits everyone. During the lunch break, Walsh approached Catherine with exciting news. Ms. Monroe, he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm, 5 more airports just signed up for the training program. They want us to help them implement it next month. Catherine smiled, remembering how different things could have been if she had reacted with anger instead of wisdom that day. The incident that could have ended Walsh's career had instead launched a new chapter in aviation security training. Back in the conference hall, Sarah Thompson presented the legal benefits of the new protocol. Insurance companies were offering reduced premiums to terminals that implemented the program, recognizing that better trained staff meant fewer incidents and lawsuits. Michael Chen, working from the Atlanta office, sent Catherine a message. Monroe Aviation's reputation had soared in the past 6 months. Their client list had grown by 40%, with many customers specifically choosing them because of their leadership in promoting respect and dignity in private aviation. Late that afternoon, Catherine watched as Walsh conducted a training session for security directors from across the country. He used his own story as a teaching tool, showing how unconscious bias could cloud judgment and lead to serious mistakes. The key, Walsh explained to his audience, is to recognize that security and respect are not opposing forces. They work together to create a safer, more efficient environment for everyone. As the day drew to a close, Catherine received news that would take the program even further. A major international aviation organization wanted to implement the Monroe Protocol at private terminals worldwide. What had started as a confrontation in Atlanta was about to become a global standard for aviation security. On the flight back to Atlanta, Catherine looked out at the sunset from her jet's window. She thought about how one moment of discrimination had led to widespread positive change. The incident hadn't just changed Walsh or the Atlanta terminal. It was transforming the entire industry's approach to security and human dignity. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest changes come from the most difficult moments. It all depends on how you choose to respond. 1 year had passed since that fateful morning at Atlanta's private terminal. Catherine Monroe stood in the same spot where she had once been denied entry. The terminal looked different now, not just physically, but in its entire atmosphere. New signs hung on the walls: security with dignity and respect is our protocol. The security checkpoint had been redesigned to be more welcoming while maintaining its effectiveness. Pictures of the diverse security team, including James Walsh, were displayed on a Meet Our Security Professionals board. Today was special. The terminal was hosting the first annual Aviation Security and Inclusion Conference. Security professionals, aviation executives, and industry leaders from around the world had gathered to learn from what had become known as the Monroe Incident and Revolution. Catherine watched as Walsh guided a group of international airport directors through the security procedures. He had become one of the most respected trainers in the industry. His story of transformation was now part of security training manuals across the globe. "A year ago, I stood right here, making the biggest mistake of my career," Walsh told the group. "Today, I'm teaching others how to avoid the same mistakes. Sometimes your worst moment can lead to your greatest purpose." Maria Rodriguez, now the Global Training Director for Monroe Aviation's security program, joined Catherine. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she asked, smiling. "Yesterday, I got calls from airports in Dubai, Singapore, and London. They'd all want to implement our program." The terminal was buzzing with activity. News crews were setting up for a special report on the one-year anniversary of the changes that had revolutionized private aviation security. Sarah Thompson was giving interviews about how the Monroe Protocol had reduced security-related complaints by 95% across participating airports. Robert Maxwell approached Catherine with a thick folder. "The latest numbers are amazing," he said. "Security clearance times are down 30%, passenger satisfaction is at an all-time high, and our staff turnover rate has dropped to nearly zero." In the conference room, Michael Chen was presenting the business impact of the changes. Monroe Aviation had doubled in size over the past year. Companies were choosing them specifically because of their leadership in promoting respectful security practices. Catherine walked through the terminal, observing the security teams in action. Every passenger, regardless of appearance, received the same professional, respectful treatment. The security guards worked with confidence and dignity, proud of their role in this new approach to aviation security. A young black female executive passed through security, receiving the same courteous treatment as everyone else. She stopped to thank Catherine. "What you did here changed everything," she said. "I fly privately all over the world, and I can see the difference your program has made." Later that afternoon, Catherine stood at the podium for the conference's keynote speech. The room was packed, with people standing along the walls. Cameras flashed as she began to speak. "1 year ago, right here in this terminal, discrimination could have won," she said. "Instead, understanding prevailed. We chose to transform a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for lasting change." She gestured to Walsh, sitting in the front row. "We learned that change doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from helping people understand their mistakes and giving them the chance to be part of the solution." As Catherine concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. The International Aviation Authority had just announced that the Monroe Protocol would become the standard for private aviation security worldwide. Outside, through the terminal's large windows, the sun was setting on another busy day. Catherine's private jet sat on the tarmac, its Monroe Aviation logo gleaming in the evening light. But now it represented more than just a successful aviation company, it had become a symbol of positive change. Walsh approached Catherine after the speech, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself that day. You didn't just save my job, you helped me find my purpose." Catherine smiled, remembering how different things could have been if she had chosen a different path that morning 1 year ago. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating others, but from helping them become better. As the conference wound down and people began to leave, Catherine took one last look around the terminal. The place where she had once faced discrimination had become a beacon of hope and change for the entire aviation industry. It proved that with the right approach, even the darkest moments could lead to the brightest transformations. The end of this story marked the beginning of a new era in aviation security, one where safety and respect went hand in hand, and where one person's choice to respond to prejudice with wisdom had changed an entire industry for the better.